Here's a question. Captain America is not the first character that was created as war propaganda, but he is certainly the most enduring and widely known. But is certainly this way this war blindly patriotic Hitler puncher. He's been that anti-government dissident. Anti-government dissidents. He's been that too. Jingoistic France hater. Yes. Most often, he has been the defender of the defenseless, regardless of what country they hail from. Because that's what America does, right. Hugely popular during the war, Cap was revived in 1964 and has remained one of Marvel's most popular characters ever since. But he's not just any super person, he's Captain America. So how has his Americanness and the changing landscape of American culture influenced his many iterations over the years? Well, prepare to be unfrozen many times over. This is loose cannon, Captain America. The superhero general was only about 3 years old when Cap punched his way onto the scene. Way on tension. Oh, you In 1941, Timely Comics released Captain America Comics No. 1, a full 9 months before the US even declared war, and it became very popular very quickly. Once the US did go to war, Captain America comics were sent in huge numbers to American troops overseas. And in contrast to the jaded troops we see in the 2011 film, Captain America comics were actually super popular. They were cheap, easy-to-ship entertainment that also boosted morale. Troops saw themselves in the stalwart manly Cap, and the kids back home saw themselves in Bucky Barnes, Captain America's young ward sidekick. Captain America's enemies were usually fictionalized Nazi types, the Red Skull being the most popular and enduring. Steve Rogers, in contrast, is strong, pure, and masculine. He has no interest in the underlying cause of the conflicts. Like all comic heroes of the day, he just knows that punching faces will solve the problem forever. The German Jewish defector scientist, originally Dr. Reinstein, a very thinly veiled allusion to the real story of Albert Einstein, leaves Germany and helps the thus invent a super serum to create an army of super soldiers, but then he's killed by a Nazi assassin and Steve ends up the only one. But it's okay, because now we have Captain America. So in a way, Steve Rogers is like the atomic bomb. You know, if we had made only one. And he became a popular franchise character. Normally this sort of Frankenstein story is a cautionary, don't play God kind of thing, but hey, it's war. Works out fine for Steve. Yeah, we got our own Uber mention. He doesn't like you, Hitler. Cap didn't pork out too well in the post-war context. Unlike Superman, who didn't have the very specific defeat Hitler reason for being, Captain America became a little lost. In the 1950s, The comics industry created the Ca as a monitoring agent at the height of the McCarthy era. This resulted in Cap being rebranded as a Kami Smasher. Because, of course, this version did not do too well, and the comic folded in 1954. So that was that. Not quite. When Captain America throws his mighty shield. The company by 1964, known as Marvel Comics, decided, hey, let's bring Captain America back and make him part of the nascent Avengers. Captain Kami Smasher got retconned. See, the real Steve Rogers disappeared with Bucky Barnes in 1944. Neither of their bodies were found. Both were presumed dead until the Avengers find him frozen in the North Atlantic. Cap also has one of the more homogeneous origin stories, so strap in, we're about to see a lot of white dudes get towed. It is here that Captain America finally has a defining character trait, besides punching. Being the man out of time and reconciling his identity as an Americanocon with the constantly changing times. Since the 60s, Cap has been a mainstay of the Avengers, as well as a star of his own title. In 1969, he partnered with Marvel's first African-American superhero, African-American. Black Panther is African. Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon. In fact, for most of the 70s, the book was rebranded as Captain America and the Falcon. And given that Vietnam just happened, and we re not too, like, patriotic in the 70s, how did Cap spend his days back then? Why, helping the Falcon patrol Harlem and keeping the kids off the street, of course. Captain America and the Falcon dealt heavily with issues of race and class and race and race. It is fabulous. But being Captain America, his relationship with his country and his in-universe place as an Americanocon is a recurring theme. He sits Vietnam out altogether. After Watergate, Steve resigns as Captain America and becomes Nomad, the man without a country. That's actually a lot less emo than it sounds, and it didn't last terribly long. He resigned again during the Reagan administration because he wanted to go along with the government's idea of what he should be, since the government owns the rights to Captain America or something. His replacement embodied a very different American ideal. John Walker had a jingoistic attitude that reflected a large segment of American culture during the Reagan years. He's more of a Rambo than a Chris Evans. So when Steve does eventually reassume his alter ego, he decides that the Captain America identity a symbol of America's ideals rather than its government. Who decides these ideals? Steve. And you know, whoever is writing him. I am just going to skip talking about the 90s, except you should know that Cap was our wolf at one point. He was our wolf. Now let's talk about the adaptations. He shook so many of them out of the trees that they coined a nickname for him. Captain America. Captain America. After the success of The Incredible Hulk and Wonder Woman, thought, hey, who else can we make a superhero show out of? And what more obvious a choice to capture the late 70s disillusionment with the US and the economic ennui than Captain America. Kebs ended up commissioning 2 movies, and while the first one is considerably worse than the second, due mostly to the presence of slumming Christopher Lee in the sequel, they are both pretty bad. Steve Rogers is played by former USC football player and future Big and Large Huge, Reb Brown. He is not a soldier, nor does he aspire to be. In fact, I'm not sure what he is really other than, like you know, an easy rider. Some science types want him to do the serum for some reason. He doesn't want to. Because I just want to kick back and find out who I am. Hey, I don't need this. Steve drives off a cliff early on, damaging only his shirt, because the bad guys or something. The second time he drives off a cliff, turns out maybe this is going to be a problem, and the scientists super serum him in order to save his life. So this version goes down as the only one where his injection is non-consensual. He eventually adopts the moniker Captain America because his father embodied the American ideal. You all sense that he believed in the American ideal and he tried to live it. Really a lot, somehow, and people called him Captain America as a joke. If I'm going to be Captain America, I want to be the same Captain America me father was in every way. I don't just want to do the things he did, I want to look the way he did as well. Because, for reasons that I'm sure made sense at the time, Caps mandated that the film not be too close to the comics. And the result only resembles Captain America in that he's the product of a drug experiment, and that's pretty much it. And they are trying to make the Captain America thing work, and it just lands with an unimaginable thud. It's perfect. Be Captain America, Steve. Jam Captain America down their throats. The late 70s, being a time of disillusionment in the American dream and a crumbling economy, was not a great atmosphere for a Captain America show. But even that doesn't excuse the bewildering choices made for this sucker. Onward. From the director of Cyborg, Nemesis, and Cyborg Nemesis, and starring Matt Salinger of J.C. Salinger's Son fame, this starts not with the captain's childhood backstory but Red Skull. And this version didn't have a theatrical release because when the studio took a look at the finished product it went, nope, we are not releasing that. Direct to video it is. But the first third does take place in the 40s, which looks an awful lot like the 80s. So after the super serum he goes on his first mission and fails utterly and immediately. 50 years later he gets unfrozen and the president sends his chunk friend, played by Ned Beatty instead of Secret Service, military, sled dogs, anyone, to Alaska to get Steve after he has been an unfrozen caveman lawyer. Seeing this guy ace of German and Japanese devices, he steals the guy, Captain America. This is not the only time in the film he steals a car, by the way. Like the red, brown, and hell, even the 1944 serial version, the fact that he's Captain America is completely incidental. This guy is Captain America in that he is a xenophobic asshole who steals cars. Don't leave me out here. Next, The Ultimates was intended to be a more realistic and gritty reboot of the Marvel Universe. But this book was running alongside the likes of Grant Morrison's new X-Men, which was already plenty that. So in order to differentiate itself, the Ultimate Universe had to go really grimdark. Enter Mark Miller, patron saint of angry 13-year-old boys. Ultimate Captain America is less an extreme version and more a logical alternative. I say logical in that some people have argued, hey, would not guy from the 40s be kind of a jingoistic belligerent prick? This version of Steve hangs out at the old folks' home because he can't relate to the modern folk. You know what? Sure. Why not? He also hits people while they re defenseless and starts fights when he's angry. He later murders his enemies after they are beaten and defenseless. Propping up the ugly postman's 911 attitude on countries that weren't wild about American foreign policy at the time, Ultimates also gives us probably the most infamous frame of all of the Captain America comics, and it gets a full page, too. And then an entire panel in the following issue congratulating itself on what a funny joke that was. Personally, I don't think someone for whom fighting alongside the French resistance was only a few months ago to him would be towing the party line of freedom freeze. But hey. It's not a completely unfair interpretation, and there is something interesting about the idea that Steve is genuinely unable to relate to anyone under the age of 80. Even so, it figures that this would be the only version who eventually becomes president. Next, Marvel's 1602 was a one-off miniseries written by Neil Gaiman, the basic thrust being that the events of the Marvel Universe took place 400 years earlier, and they centered around the Roanoke colony in Virginia. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed Steve Rogers is the Native American bodyguard to Virginia Dare, Raj has. See, it only made sense to me once he said it out loud. The Native American part is sort of hand-waved away with like, oh, some Welshman must have gotten fresh with one of the natives like 20, 30 years ago. But where all of the other characters are actually of their time, albeit like mutants, it turns out that Rajhas is the actual Captain America who was sent back in time from a future fascist America. And it's Steve's presence in the past that makes it so the heroes of his time appear 400 years earlier instead of as we know it. So he's gotta go back to the future or the universe will explode. Only he doesn't want to go back, you guys. See, now that he's in the past, he can make it so all the American bad never happens. You know, we can circumvent the genocide of the natives. We can make it so slavery is never a thing. No McCarthyism, no Scientology, no Space Jam. But Nick Fury tricks him into going back. So no better future America for you, Cap. Nice tree, though. Moving on. There are roughly 1 million Marvel cartoons from the last 15 years, and about half of them are Avengers-type things, and Captain America at least cameos in all of them. There are some. Ultimate Avengers, as implied by the title, is loosely based on the first Ultimates limited run. It is boring and unremarkable. Hitler's dead. Except for that. Red Skull. I can't believe somebody found you and thawed you out. The Superhero Squad show is the rare Marvel-based comedy, so the unfrozen caveman lawyer aspect is not only played up, it seems to be Captain America's main defining attribute. Karaoke. It's Japanese. Yes, the Japanese are on our side now, and I bid them welcome. He's so happy we re-friends. You re-safe. You re-with friends. What are you? Some kind of hydro-automaton. Listen. Avengers Earth, Mightiest Heroes marks the first attempted tie-in with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is also unremarkable. But I do like how this show manages to cut Hitler out of World War II entirely. Apparently Hydra originated in a more, like, Russia-ly direction. How does this contraption turn water into coffee? Is it coal power, or is it a miracle? Avengers Assemble, while not officially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe canon, like, say, Agent Carter, is based off the movie universe. So, with the exception of the Hulk, who is inexplicably articulate, and Falcon, who does not share his movie counterpart's backstory, these are basically kidified versions of the movie characters. Anyway, moving on. Civil War may be the most well-known arc in the comics in which Captain America is a main player. Sadly, the basic premise is that the American government passes a superhuman registration act. Iron Man supports it. Captain America opposes it. Everyone is completely out of character to make the whole Civil War premise work, and it's terrible. Everyone, and is I'm so I'm so close I So it's no real surprise that this, too, was written by odious boy Mark Miller. Cap is portrayed as a short-sighted reactionary hothead. Meanwhile, Tony Stark and Reed Richards create some sort of, like, interdimensional space gulag where they keep unregistered super people in order to make Steve's extreme scene justified. Civil War ends when he just kind of gives up in issue 7 because fighting is bad and property damage. You guys. You know, because he couldn't to deduce that superhero fights might cause collateral damage and cost innocent lives. Steve is a hot mess, but honestly, the award for character assassination goes to poor Tony. Although the award for literal character assassination goes to Steve, as he gets assassinated at the end. Oh, he comes back. I don't want to discuss Civil War without mentioning, also, Ed Brubaker's excellent run on Captain America, which ran before, during, and after Civil War. Brubaker's run is where the Winter Soldier arc originated post-assassination, who but Bucky takes over the role of Captain America. And the series tees in a lot with Steve's past in World War II. There's even one scene where Cap raises the French and says, "It really galls me to hear me own people dismissing the French as cowards." Next. So, speaking of military propaganda, speaking of military property, but while this film did to go down that road, it also doesn't shy away from Captain America's roots as propaganda either. This movie opts not to demonize Nazis. Instead, they are also almost completely omitted in favor of Hydra. Back to the American ideal, which is a very specific reason of why Steve wants to go to war in the first place. Tommy Lee Jones' character has more traditional ideas on power and masculinity and what makes a good soldier. In a way, he is describing a Captain America from the 40s. But in the end, the super soldier isn't an ultra-masculine jaw puncher, but a chaste, sensitive artist. First, Steve is intuitive, and then he is self-sacrificing. His lack of pomposity is what makes the movie work. That, and Chris Evans, whose face has been kissed by the angles, really perfect casting. I beg to differ. Where Captain America, the first Avenger, ends with Steve as unfrozen caveman lawyer, the Avengers assemble in the book for trademark reasons, serves as Steve's acclamation to the modern world. And while we rehear, I'm going to quickly touch on this, thing that comes up sometimes. If Steve left the world in 1944, how is he not a huge fucking racist? Some people really hate the idea of Steve even mucking up by saying something that would have been totally acceptable in the 40s, but isn't anymore, because Steve is just that intuitive. But even if he was the most egalitarian thing that ever lived, he'd probably say something well-meaning and inappropriate. But since the Hugh is not our universe, and we've got some revisionist history going down therein because the army in this way appears to be totally integrated, I'm going with different universe, different rules. Yes. Steve Rogers, perfect human. Steve's paradigm shift in this one is more in the subtext, which for a movie as full as this is a good thing. He's a fish out of water, but not obnoxiously so. I understood that reference. He still talks like he's performing when his guard is up, and he calls Natasha ma'am all the time. Captain Rogers. Ma'am. The closest we ever get to Steve Rogers' not perfect human is when he repeatedly tries to go Tony into putting on his Iron Man suit so they can punch it out like men. Put on the suit. Let's go a few rounds. Put on the suit. Let's find out. I'm not afraid to hit an old man. Put on the suit. This is very unlike movie Steve, but then there's like an evil Loki thing in the room, so okay. His arc is basically, can he deal with Tony Stark? Wait, hold on. How is this now about I am sorry, isn't everything. The modern Captain America stands in some contrast to movies like Man of Steel and Transformers, which got heavy subsidies from the American military and did require script approval from the government before they were allowed to receive these subsidies. Yes, this is still a thing. The Avengers rather famously sought and was denied the aforementioned DOD subsidy, and all of this stuff is off the books. So we may never know exactly what went down between Marvel and, the government. But apparently the long and short of said denial was that the script was propagandistic enough. I recognize the council has made a decision, but given that it's a stupid-ass decision, I've elected to ignore it. How funny that, where Captain America the First Avenger is a coming-of-age war story, The Winter Soldier is more of a conspiracy thriller. At the start of the movie, Steve seems more comfortable with the unfrozen caveman lawyer thing. There are subtle changes in his language. For instance, he isn't calling Natasha ma'am all the time. Where did Captain America learn how to steal a car? I see what you did there, movie. Don't leave me out here. When he first meets Sam Wilson, he immediately rejects the idea of the good old days as being a better time. You must miss the good old days. Ho! Things aren't so bad. Food's a lot better. We used to boil everything. No polio's good. Internet, so helpful. He doesn't notify the whole greatest generation thing. Winter Soldier is also much more topical. It deals with themes of terrorism and government transparency. It is considerably less comic book in tone than either the first movie or the Avengers, and Steve's main internal conflict is that of serving the country he knows versus the changing nature of the country today. And I thought I could throw myself back in, follow orders, serve. It's just not the same. It's just not that this is not the same. So the Captain America aspect is very front and center in the form of Steve's conflict. So the mid-movie reveal that almost all of the bad things that have happened to the world since World War I is because Hydra had infiltrated IELD for 70 years. Hydra has been secretly feeding crisis. It's lame. It's extremely lame. The word is lame. Hydra created a world so chaotic that humanity is finally ready to sacrifice its freedom. Like, the movie stops just short of implying that Hydra planned 9-11. And when history did not cooperate, history was changed. It's kinda nice to be able to stop blaming all of our problems on misfortune, bad people, and short-sighted international policy made in America, own self-interest, and just say it's all Hydra's fault. Hank Glider. Given that the film deals heavily with government surveillance and with releasing information, we've come to an interesting full circle. In the beginning, Cap was a blind patriot, punching for his country without question. Now he defends American ideals a la Edward Snowden. Captain America defends freedom by giving the world transparency, and by letting Bucky punch his face. Steve Rogers. Perfect human. There's been some kerfuffle recently over the current run of all new Captain America, and the fact that Captain America is now black. Like, it's just some random black dude. Like world, it's a Sam Wilson. It's the Falcon. He's been Steve's partner for decades. He was in the movie and everything. While character must have logical reason to be anything other than the default is a really lame crave for pushing back against more diverse characters, it is especially lame in this case. Steve is still there as a character, only now his super serum has worn off and he is aged. And Sam Wilson is in the early stages of figuring out what it means for him to be Captain America. And that is important, because one thing that hasn't changed is American people's desire to see themselves in Cap. Even 70 years later, people still expect Cap to uphold what they see as American ideals. But that is part of why he is Steve Rogers, perfect human. People from all political walks of life can aspire to be compassionate, intuitive, trustworthy, adaptable, and just. And that is just the character that Captain America has evolved into. As long as Mark Miller is to writing him. If it doesn't stand for France, what does it stand for? Perhaps it stands for abstract personifications of unfathomable beings, this being the theme chosen by me patrons on Patreon for the next episode. So here are your 3 options. If it's not clear, the options are God, Satan, and death. So those are the choices. Here's the link for you to vote. The link is also below the video. If you like this show, please consider supporting it on Patreon, and I will announce the winner of this thing a couple of days on my Twitter, which is here. Every 5th video will be me choice, so the video after next is not going up for a vote. It will be me choice. Live in fear, people. Thank you for watching, and thank you for playing. Bye.